let's get into it then. Let's talk about the Music City Bowl. Let's go to Missouri playing against Iowa. I think this is for these teams. I guess you could say underperformed, right? Missouri got to 9 wins, okay, and that's like really good for them, okay. But also with their schedule draw, right? Some of the offensive talent, I think that they maybe underperformed a little bit. Maybe also that defensive talent, maybe we underrated the defensive talent that we were seeing from them because holy cow, then was it 4 or 5 NFL draft picks, right? Last year's defensive class alone, and you lose Blake Baker to LSU, and then Iowa, not the powerful, dominant mainstay defense that we've come to see. A little bit better on offense, and the reason why I took their over 8.5 wins at significant plus money was because I'm like, man, if you get like a top 80 offense from these guys, which I thought that they could, and they did, right? You're like, yeah, maybe we can. Well, they did when they were healthy at spots, right? And yeah, it's just the defense that kind of disappointed a little bit in some games. So very interesting. Not that it was a bad defense; it's still a good defense. I just think these are two really, really interesting teams. You got an Iowa team that's going to try to run the ball, a Missouri team that's had a tough time stopping the run when they've played against good running teams. So I think this is a really, really interesting matchup. And everyone's going to try to use this as a litmus test for like the Big Ten versus the SEC. And I think we should just enjoy the game.
I'll second that as well. You two teams are 8-4, 9-3, Iowa and Missouri. Looking at their schedules, right? Missouri was a team you talked about it, where it's like, yeah, they're 9-3, but it's a little bit frustrating almost because they played someone with a pulse, right? Their three losses, right? You got blown out by A&M, you got blown out by Alabama, and you lost to South Carolina there in a much more competitive game than we had originally thought there. So give you credit for going on the road there. You needed a last second touchdown drive from South Carolina to win that for them. But Iowa, in a similar sense, they had some actually a difference that they had some, tough losses, I think, more in terms of like losses that maybe you go back and you're a little bit frustrated you didn't get done. Right. On the road in Los Angeles there against UCLA, right? On the road in East Lansing against Michigan State, right? Kind of getting boat raced in that one. And then you lost the Cyhawk game early in September in a game where you should have won. You were dominating that game. And then all of a sudden you decide to stop running the football with one of the best players in the country. Speaking of him, right, Caleb Johnson, if it wasn't for Genty and Scadaboo and other guys like that putting in work, and they should be spotlighted, Johnson was a guy that was so valuable for this team here. Over 1,700 scrimmage yards, 260 plus touches, right? He was so important, especially with the revolving door at quarterback, some injuries at the wide receiver position. He was a guy you could always count on. I remember watching him in person there in Minneapolis, in September, and he was incredible, right? And he was incredible. You got a couple younger guys there that'll be seeing more touches. Obviously, it's Iowa, so these running backs will be the focal point. They do recruit well. They've got guys in the pipeline to take over. But I think there'll still be a little bit of drop off. Obviously, Kamari Moulton, the young freshman. You also got Jason Patterson, a couple of guys that will be interesting to see in a little bit more heavy bulk workload without a guy like Caleb Johnson that you can just kind of rely upon. And what made him so dangerous too is it wasn't that he was a bruiser and he was getting 4 to 5 yards, which he would, right? Very physical runner. But what made him so dangerous was, and this is what I was done for a while now, is those explosive 70 plus yard running plays, 60 plus yard touchdowns that, when their offense is stagnant and they can't consistently move the football down the field, they can just pop one off outside zone here. Someone misses a tackle, misses a block, boom, 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 and it's a touchdown. And it totally flips the direction and momentum of the game. Like you said, Missouri potentially struggling to stop the run at times against teams that do like to run the football. Right, looking at Le'Veon Moss there from A&M, had 138 yards. Obviously, South Carolina, what they can do on the ground, although Sellers was very good in the air in that game. But yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what kind of gives here in terms of Missouri defensively and also offensively, their explosiveness, hopefully, with Brady Cook and Eli Drinkwitz versus this Iowa, conservative, slow it down type of football.
Yeah, you got some wideouts right at skill position spots for Missouri. Luther Burden, but also too, I think maybe Luther Burden's value is a little bit overrated. Not that he's an overrated football player. I just think like the position that he plays, that slot spot, I think it can be that kind of production can be
schemed up.
especially the production that we saw from Luther Burden this season, that can be replicated to some degree in the aggregate of whatever you're going to throw out there, right? But the running back spot, right? I think there's a chance that they could run the ball, and that wasn't something that I thought that Iowa was going to, be a problem for them at times. But here we are, right? I have Missouri winning and covering this game. I don't feel great about it. It's not a best bet by any means. And I don't. I have been on the train that like, why is Missouri a top 25 team? Like when the AP was just leaving them in there, like, and I'm an A&M fan, right? It's Gig Aggies, right? And after that win, I just couldn't help but just be like, man, maybe I I don't know if that Missouri's that good, right? And down the stretch, we kind of saw their flaws for sure, and I guess we'll see. I think Membo is a big loss on the offensive line. I believe he's out of there. Is he draft or is he transfer portal?
I think he opted out. I'm pretty
So
sure.
yeah, probably draft. That is a solid tackle right there. That is a solid tackle that you're losing right there. Tollison's been out for the last couple of weeks, and this was the strength of their team, right? Heading in the season, you're like, yeah, they got the wide receivers and the quarterback, right? But you looked at the offensive line, and you lost Javon Foster, and you return almost everyone else, and you're like, man, and then you plug and play Caden Green too. You're like, man, maybe we got something here, right? And uh, yeah, it was pretty good at times, but you're losing two of those mainstay pieces, so that is definitely something to be concerned about, right? So I'll still take Missouri to win and cover though.
Yeah, I'm with you there, and I don't feel great about it. I'm not going to add it to my best bets at the counter at all. Either way, I looked at the total for a second, and I thought, maybe Missouri's offense without Luther Burden and maybe not being as explosive as we had thought. No running back, or excuse me, no wide receiver and no offensive tackle. That could hurt them. We could see a spot where we just have a bloodbath there in Nashville, as sometimes we do get. But the reality is, I just don't know. I think more times than not, Missouri wins and they win and cover. So that's why I lean that way. And I also think like they have multiple ways to win. I still don't hate them in a game where it's a bloodbath and it's a low scoring football game and they're actually running the football. Right? Brady Cook has done a good job of taking care of the football this year. Hasn't been super explosive. We keep using that word because that's what it was last year with him, Weiss, Luther Burden. You had the running back as well, which I'm forgetting his name, who was freaking awesome for him last year. And it just kind of took a step back. But I think in November, you started playing better football. And that a lot of that had to do with getting back a healthy, Brady Cook, because we saw how bad it was with Pine in there. But you also started running the football. Like the two Sun Belt transfers, Nate Noel, Marcus Carroll. Marcus Carroll especially was a guy we were high on this offseason and waiting for him to really kind of take over like he did in the Sun Belt and start leaning on teams in the SEC. And you got better and better in November. And that was really important. Now, it did help that you look at the schedule and you're playing, oh, look, it's a couple of bottom feeders in the SEC. You got Oklahoma, Auburn, Mississippi, or Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi State, right? But the reality is, I think that point still stands because they were not impressive at all throughout the first 9 weeks, right? Probably that's it. The most impressive win was Buffalo, and I get it. We love Pete Lembo, but that should not be the expectation for Missouri right now. I also do think that Iowa defensively, I mean, they're still really, really talented. And their only opt out to
Yeah,
cornerback. And I get that. Like Harris is a good football player. Jamari Harris for him. But you still have a ton of talent in that secondary. Right. The safeties, you've got Castro on the slot there. Obviously Higgins and Nick Jackson are just so good at the linebacker spot. You
Craig is
got
a
Deion
beast.
Craig, yeah, Black, Ethan Hurkett, Graves, Llewellyn. Like you have so many guys there too. And it really worries me a little bit to like really take Missouri because I could see a spot where you got Iowa just playing what kind of football they want to play, and who knows there. I also think too. Lastly, for me, the wide receiver Reese Vander Zee coming back healthy. That's a big deal, right? He was a guy we talked about early in the season, and he did some good stuff for him. I mean, he missed a lot of football games, and he is still like their fourth leading receiver, and he's their second leading wide receiver, right? If it shows you what kind of offense they run, there hasn't played since mid-October when he got hurt against Michigan State. Um, yeah, I mean that's a guy that I think very talented, bigger, 6'4", young kid that could give you some options. And you've got Brendan Sullivan starting for you. Well, I don't even know if we've even talked about that yet for Iowa. Cade McNamara back in the portal, I think, and it's going to be Brendan Sullivan who's healthy. and he can give you some of that added running dimension. He wasn't great throwing the football right when he was in there. I would argue it was better than McNamara just because it gave you a little bit of explosiveness. Right, Cade McNamara averaged under 6 yards per attempt. You had, you had Brendan Sullivan was a lot closer to 10, right? Although he did have the the couple interceptions there, but I don't know. I think Sullivan, and I think Iowa fans would agree for a while there, is giving you a better chance to win than Cade McNamara, and two, having a chance to have bowl prep and kind of get back to it, get your wide receivers healthy. Luke Lackley, the tight end, find out ways to scheme open yards and production that Caleb Johnson normally would have for you.
Yeah, when you talked about earlier, like you were thinking about taking the under in the total, I was actually opposite. I thought about taking the over at 40.5 here because I'm like, I try to convince myself, right, that like, okay, there's production between Moulton and Patterson, right? Like you could still run the ground if you're physical enough. But the thing is though, it's like when you want to like try to quantify how effective a running back is, right? You look at explosive plays and Iowa, for how much for teams knew that they were going to run the ball, right? And in the Big Ten, you were still top 10 in 50 plus yard runs, 40 plus yard runs, 30 plus yard runs. Like you were explosive. And at times you were kind of dependent on it. Like, so I'm just not sure whether explosive plays are going to be generated, right? If not by Caleb Johnson. Okay. But I do see a situation. I see it both ways where you're like, okay, well, with these running backs, right, they could still be good, but maybe they just try to control the game, right? Get those first downs, those third and shorts, and maybe Missouri struggles some on offense against the talented Iowa defense. I don't know, but that's a stay away in terms of all bets for me. But I am excited to see again. I said, hey, let's not use this as a litmus test, but you know that we all are. So you know that we all
Yeah,
are.
absolutely. And real quick, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up Johnny Walker, defensive end for Missouri. He has been fantastic. And if you want to get after Brendan Sullivan, this offense and that running game in the front seven, he has been fantastic in November. 5.5 sacks in his last 5 games, 3 forced fumbles. Are you kidding me? Those kinds of turnovers in these bowl games sometimes make such a difference. And you could see, a turnover, forced fumble, tip pass here or there that Walker or anyone else on the defense makes for Missouri could be huge, especially if you are struggling against this Iowa defense. Um, yeah, and he's a senior too, which we love.
Well, 2 years ago in the Music City Bowl, we saw how important turnovers were. In this time, they were in Iowa's favor against Kentucky, right? So yeah, I see your angle there. I see your angle.